There's a version of this story where Peter Ridsdale is a genius. For about 4 years, that's exactly what people called him. He's sitting in a press conference in March 2003, and the club he has run for 6 years is dying in front of him. Terry Venables is beside him, staring at the table, saying almost nothing. Someone asks him, essentially, how did you let this happen? And Ridsdale says the thing that will follow him for the rest of his life. Should we have spent so heavily in the past? Probably not. But we lived the dream. We enjoyed the dream. Say that sentence to a Leeds fan today and watch what happens to their face. This isn't a story about a football club going bankrupt. Clubs go bankrupt. It happens more often than people think. This is a story about a man who was handed the thing he loved most in the world, who believed genuinely at every single step that he was saving it, and who ended up being the reason it nearly didn't survive. So the real question isn't what happened to Leeds United. You already half know that part. The question is, how does that happen? How does a fan become the villain of his own club's history while telling himself the entire time that he's the hero? To understand Ridsdale, you have to understand what Leeds was before him. In 1992, Leeds United are champions of England. The last champions, in fact, before the whole competition rebrands itself as the Premier League, and the money starts arriving in numbers nobody in English football has seen before. Gordon Strachan lifts the trophy. Gary McAllister and Gary Speed are in that midfield. And so, for one strange half-season, is a brilliant, unpredictable Frenchman named Eric Cantona. Within months, Cantona is gone. Sold to Manchester United for £1 million in a phone call that started as an inquiry about a completely different player entirely. Leeds don't think much of the sale at the time. £1 million is decent business. They'll think about it a great deal more later, once they understand exactly what they gave away. For the next 5 years, Leeds are a good club having an ordinary time. Solid, respectable, occasionally frustrating. They lose a League Cup final 3-0 to Aston Villa in 1996, and it barely registers as a surprise. Manchester United keep winning things. Leeds keep almost getting there. Then, in 1997, a local businessman named Peter Ridsdale becomes chairman. He isn't an oligarch. He isn't an outsider with a spreadsheet and no emotional stake in the outcome. He grew up in Leeds, went to school in Leeds, supported this club before he ever sat on its board. He's a fan who somehow ended up with the keys. And underneath him, something real is already growing. Out at Thorpe Arch, the club's training ground, an academy director named Paul Hart has built what people at the club start calling the Golden Generation. A group of teenagers who win the FA Youth Cup in 1993 and again in 1997. Jonathan Woodgate, Alan Smith, Paul Robinson, Ian Hart. Kids who'll grow up to play in the same shirt they wore at 15. Coached in part by a club legend named Eddie Gray, a man who's about to matter a great deal more to this story than anyone expects right now. When David O'Leary takes over as manager in 1998, he doesn't hold any of them back. He throws them straight into a Premier League team, and Leeds start playing football that makes people sit up and notice. Alan Smith scores on his debut against Liverpool, a boy from Rothwell finishing a move he'd have drawn up in his own back garden as a kid. By 1999, Leeds finish fourth. The following year, they reach a UEFA Cup semi-final. This isn't luck, and it isn't accidental. It's a boy from Leeds Modern School watching his hometown club become genuinely, unmistakably good again, and believing, for the first time in years, that the club he loves might actually be as big as he always felt it was. There's an early warning sign here nobody notices at the time because it's dressed up as ordinary football business. Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, an instant fan favorite, wants a new contract in 1999, doesn't get one he likes, and is sold to Atletico Madrid for £12 million, 6 times what Leeds paid for him. On paper, it's brilliant business. In practice, it's the first small proof that this club can turn a player it built into a number on a spreadsheet whenever it's convenient. Nobody stops to ask what that logic looks like once it's applied to an entire squad. That belief is not his flaw. His love for this club is real, and for a while it produces real success. The flaw is what comes next. The inability to tell the difference between believing in something and betting everything you have on it. If this is the kind of story you come here for, before we go any further into how deep this actually goes, hit subscribe. Because what happens to Ridsdale after this club is finished with him is almost stranger than what happens to the club itself. Let's get into it. The 2000 to 2001 season is the best few months of Peter Ridsdale's life. Leeds go into the Champions League and don't just survive it, they compete in it. They lose 4-0 away at Barcelona, then beat Milan at Elland Road on a Lee Bowyer shot that squirms through the goalkeeper's hands in the 89th minute. They put 6 past Besiktas in a single evening, then go to the Bernabeu and actually lead Real Madrid before Figo and Raul combine twice to turn it around. In the quarterfinal against Deportivo La Coruña, they go 3-0 up at home, then spend 90 terrifying minutes in Spain hanging on by their fingernails. In the middle of all that, Marc Viduka scores 4 goals in a single game against Liverpool, a 4-3 win Elland Road still talks about, and becomes the kind of cult hero clubs build identities around. That's the version of this Leeds that's easy to fall in love with. Fearless, built partly from the academy, partly from smart, ambitious signings. And in that same stretch, in November 2000, Ridsdale does something that will define him more than almost anything else. He signs Rio Ferdinand from West Ham for £18 million, a British transfer record and a world record fee for a defender, the most expensive one on the planet at the time. The fans love it. The football writers call it ambition. Nobody at that moment calls it what it will later look like, which is a man trying to buy his way permanently into a level his club's actual finances cannot sustain. To pay for it all, in September 2001, the board takes out a loan. £60 million structured over 25 years, secured against gate receipts at Elland Road. The theory is simple enough to fit on a napkin. Leeds keep qualifying for the Champions League, the broadcast money, and the extra gate receipts keep coming in. The loan quietly pays for itself in the background while nobody has to think about it too hard. The theory only works if Leeds never stop qualifying. That same season, Leeds reached the Champions League semi-final. 90 minutes at Elland Road end goalless. Both sides hit the woodwork, and Nigel Martin produces a save from an overhead kick people still talk about years later. In the away leg at Valencia, it takes Juan Sanchez exactly 101 single point behind Liverpool. 1 point stands between qualifying for the Champions League again and not. Most boards would treat a miss that narrow as a warning shot. Ridsdale treats it as bad luck, correctable with more spending. That summer, he sanctions another £28 million combined on Robbie Keane, Robbie Fowler, and a young Derby County midfielder named Seth Johnson, whose contract talks become their own small legend. A story about a chairman so eager to be liked that he allegedly kept raising his own offer because he mistook an agent's silence for disappointment. Whether that exact version is entirely true or not, Johnson leaves those negotiations earning nearly 4 times what he was on at Derby, for a player who never comes close to justifying it. Underneath all of this, something else is unraveling, and it isn't financial. In January 2000, Jonathan Woodgate and Lee Bowyer had been involved in an attack on a young student named Sarfraz Najib, leaving him with serious injuries. The first trial runs for 9 weeks and costs an estimated £8 million in legal fees before it collapses entirely. A newspaper prints an interview alleging the attack was racially motivated. Several jurors read it, and the judge has no choice but to discharge them. A retrial starts months later in Hull. Woodgate is eventually convicted of a fray. Bowyer is acquitted. A young man was seriously hurt, and that fact doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient to the football story running alongside it. For 2 years, while Leeds are trying to be one of the best teams in Europe, this case runs in every newspaper next to their results, a second kind of rot happening at exactly the same time as the first. In 2001-2, Leeds missed Champions League qualification again. 5th place, 5 points short. This is the moment the whole structure was built to survive once, not twice. David O'Leary is sacked. Terry Venables comes in and says, publicly, that the club needs to find £15 million just to balance the books. Rio Ferdinand is sold to Manchester United, the actual rivals, the same club that took Cantona a decade earlier, for just over £29 million. It's presented as the solution. It isn't enough. It was never going to be enough. By early 2003, the number being quoted is somewhere around £80 million in debt. By the end of that January, Robbie Keane, Lee Bowyer, Olivier Dacour, Jonathan Woodgate, and Robbie Fowler are all gone, sold in the space of a few weeks like furniture in a house clearance. Woodgate, an academy boy, one of the kids who grew up in this shirt, one of Paul Hart's golden generation, goes to Newcastle for £9 million. Fans who watched him come through Thorpe Arch as a teenager watch him leave for a fraction of what he's worth, sold, not because the club wants to sell him, but because it has no choice left. Harry Kewell will follow him out the door within months, sold to Liverpool for £5 million, £2 million of which goes straight to his agent, so Leeds actually receive 3. Decourt, Keane, and Fowler go the same way for whatever anyone will pay. None of it adds up to what was spent putting the squad together in the first place, and everyone at the club knows it. This is the press conference. Venables sitting beside him, staring at the table. And Ridsdale, in front of the cameras, saying the club is paying the price for having lived the dream. It's worth sitting with what that sentence actually is. It isn't an apology. It isn't even really an explanation. It's a man narrating his own downfall as though it were a story that happened to him, rather than a decision he made with his own signature. He resigns within weeks. His successor, a man named John Mackenzie, puts it more simply than Ridsdale ever managed to. Leeds lived the dream, and I inherited the nightmare. By October that year, a new chief executive named Trevor Birch is brought in to find anyone willing to invest in what's left. In January 2004, with debt still climbing, the club asks its own players to defer a quarter of their wages. The senior professionals, Michael Duberry, Mark Viduka, Gary Kelly among them, agree almost immediately. Somehow the story that reaches the newspapers is that the players are being greedy. Duberry calls it a misinterpretation years later, but by then the damage to how fans see their own team is already done. A consortium led by Gerald Krasner completes a takeover in March 2004 for £30 million with 10 matches left to play. Leeds are still bottom of the table when it happens. The selling doesn't stop that season either. Nigel Martin, who started in goal in that Champions League semi-final 3 years earlier, is sold to Everton for £500,000. Peter Reid is sacked as manager in November after an 8 out of 9 losing run and a 6-1 defeat at Portsmouth, the heaviest in the club's Premier League history. Eddie Gray comes back. The man who'd coached Woodgate, Kewell, and Smith as kids is now asked to save the club they built together on a caretaker basis at Trevor Birch's personal request. He knows exactly what he's walking into. "I knew the situation the club was in from a financial point of view," he says later. "It didn't take long to realize it would need someone much better than me to turn it around." His side managed a 5-game unbeaten run over Christmas. It isn't enough either. They then lose 6 league games in a row. On the 2nd of May 2004, Leeds lose 4-1 away at Bolton. It effectively ends their season in the Premier League. In the away end, there are children who can't stop crying and grown men who aren't doing much better. On the pitch, a young player walks around applauding the traveling fans, stopping every few steps to wipe his face until the goalkeeper comes over and puts an arm around him. 6 days later, back at Elland Road, the mathematics finally catch up with them for good. Michael Duberry played through almost this entire story, signed in 1999, still there for the end. "The atmosphere and environment was the best of my football career," he says of the early years. Of the end, he remembers something much smaller and much heavier. Sitting on the dressing room floor after the home game that finally confirmed it, no shirt on, thinking, "You're not good enough anymore. You're not even a Premier League player." That realization really hits home. That home game was against Charlton. Leeds were 3-1 up with 20 minutes left. Jason Ewell scored twice in the space of a few minutes, and it finished 3-3, and that was that. Leeds go down. 19th place, 33 points, 79 goals conceded, the worst defensive record in the entire division. A team that had been 90 minutes from a Champions League final 3 years earlier is now, officially, a championship club. None of this touches Ridsdale directly. He's already gone. The debt he built, the academy kids he sold off, the loan repayments, all of it lands on everyone who stayed behind. The players who have to live with a relegation they didn't create. The fans who kept turning up anyway. Average home attendance that relegation season is still over 36,000. Watching a club they never stopped loving get dismantled by decisions made 2 chairmen ago. Here's the part of the story most people don't know. Ridsdale doesn't disappear after Leeds. He goes on to chair 3 more clubs: Barnsley, Cardiff City, Plymouth Argyle, and at each one some version of the same story finds him again. Winding up petitions, boards in crisis, and an exit that never quite lasts. In 2012, the Insolvency Service disqualifies him from serving as a company director for 6 years. His own consultancy firm had collapsed, owing nearly £500,000, and investigators found he'd diverted more than $300,000 of it, money owed to the company by football clubs, straight into his own bank account. This is not a man whose story stopped at Leeds. It's a pattern that just kept finding new clubs to happen to. He published a memoir in 2007, blaming everyone else for what went wrong. David O'Leary called it deranged. Leeds themselves aren't finished paying either. In 2005, under new owner Ken Bates, the club is still carrying the weight of everything Ridsdale built. 2 years later, in May 2007, Leeds enter administration a second time, a 10-point deduction and a second relegation into League One. somewhere the club has never once been in its history. The Football League nearly expels them altogether over how the takeover was structured, before settling on a 15-point penalty instead. Leeds still finish 5th that season, starting from -15. It takes 3 years before they climb back out. It takes until 2020 to get all the way back to the Premier League. 16 years, 4 different owners, 2 spells outside the top 2 divisions. Elland Road itself, sold off in 2004 just to keep the lights on, doesn't come back into the club's own hands until owner Andrea Radrizzani buys it back in 2017. 13 years after Ridsdale's board first gave it away. Promotion finally arrives in the end under a strange Argentine coach named Marcelo Bielsa, who turns up with none of Ridsdale's charisma and none of his recklessness, and simply builds something that lasts more than a single golden season. Today, the club is owned outright by an American investment group tied to the San Francisco 49ers, who paid £170 million for the privilege, a figure that would have sounded like science fiction to a boardroom drowning in an £80 million hole 20 years earlier. By then, doing a Leeds has become a phrase in English football. Any club that spends beyond itself chasing European qualification then gets warned they might do a Leeds. Newcastle got warned about it. Portsmouth actually did it. Bolton did it too. Nobody says Ridsdale when they use the phrase anymore. They don't need to. The club's name became the warning label. His own name just became a footnote inside it. Maybe the real story was never really about Ridsdale. The collapse is what happened to him. The real story is what happened to everyone else. The academy kids who grew up dreaming of this shirt and got sold off to pay for someone else's gamble. The fans who kept coming even as 36,000 of them watched their club get quietly dismantled in front of them. The ones who stood in the away end at Bolton and cried without being told to, who waited 16 years for a manager who didn't need to be loved, he just needed to be right. Ridsdale broke their trust completely. They rebuilt the club without him. That's the part that outlasts everything. Every empire has a story, every story has a price. The only question that ever really matters is, who's still paying for it?